When you sit down and try to conceptualize a theater of war,
Hmm.
I feel like our minds just inherently default to um, physical geography.
Oh, absolutely. We picture physical maps.
Right, exactly. You picture the topographical maps, the oceanic choke points, contested airspace.
Yeah.
A theater commander looks at the physical terrain, they assess where the forces are, and they maneuver assets to basically control those physical domains.
I mean, that has been the fundamental premise of military strategy since Sun Tzu.
Right.
It's the whole foundational logic of kinetic conflict. You'd secure a geographical objective through the application or, the threat of superior physical force.
Yeah.
And even as we moved into, the space and cyber domains over the years, the ultimate goal was still largely to enable or degrade physical operations on the ground or at sea or in the air.
But, and this is what really struck me, pouring through this latest stack of defense intelligence, you realize that traditional map is being rendered remarkably obsolete by a totally new strategic framework.
It really is. It's a massive shift.
We are looking at this emerging combat landscape that just doesn't exist on a physical globe. The frontier they are mapping out is the neurobiological architecture of the human brain itself.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. We are moving from kinetic dominance to cognitive dominance.
And it represents a complete paradigm shift from targeting an adversary's hardware to directly targeting the wetware,
Oh, where, yeah?
the actual cognitive processes of the commanders and the operators. The objective isn't necessarily to destroy the enemy's radar system anymore.
Right.
It's to manipulate or overwhelm or even biologically degrade the neurological capacity of the person who is analyzing that radar data.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. So, welcome. We have a seriously formidable stack of source materials to get through today.
Oh, massive stack.
Yeah, massive stack.
Right.
We're looking at translated defense reports,
Ugh.
think tank analyses, academic papers from military academies, and some really dense strategic intelligence assessments.
And all of these were published between late 2024 and early 2026.
Exactly. And the value of this particular stack for you listening is that it relies super heavily on primary source translations.
Yeah, we aren't just looking at what Western analysts think.
No, we are looking at internal doctrinal textbooks, like the latest iterations of the science of military strategy. We're looking at their meticulous tracking of defense procurement, research budgets, and all this institutional restructuring.
Right.
So our mission today is to trace the breathtakingly rapid modernization of China's People's Liberation Army, the PLA, under Xi Jinping.
But we should clarify, we aren't here to just read off a ledger of ship tonnages or missile counts.
Oh, definitely not. The goal is to decode the mindset and the operational doctrine driving this entire buildup. We are exploring their sci-fi level technological ambitions.
And they really are sci-fi level.
Yeah, they are. And equally importantly, we're going to look at the severe internal bureaucratic frictions of a military that has basically been mandated to become a world-class fighting force by the year 2049.
And to accurately map that trajectory, you really have to look holistically at the entire apparatus.
Right.
That means analyzing how they are re-engineering their entire top-down command structure, tracking their massive financial investments in next-generation domains like biotechnology, and evaluating the systemic vulnerabilities that could just, undermine the entire project.
Right. But before we really delve into the specifics, I want to establish a very clear framework for our discussion today.
Good idea.
The source material we are unpacking touches on highly sensitive geopolitical, military, and strategic topics. So our objective today is strictly analytical.
Exactly.
We are not endorsing any political viewpoints, nor are we taking sides on the geopolitical stage. We are going to impartially report on the contents of these documents.
Yeah, we're evaluating the military strategies and theories precisely as they are laid out in the original sources provided to us. Our role is just to synthesize the data and explain the strategic logic embedded within these texts.
Right, examining the doctrine as written and the capabilities as observed. So, returning to that initial concept of the cognitive battlefield, the sources outline a military apparatus that isn't just preparing for, say, a high-end naval clash in the Indo-Pacific.
No, not at all.
They are preparing for a battle space where brain-machine interfaces, algorithmic combat, and genetic engineering are actually deployed to exert control over the cognitive domain.
It honestly sounds like speculative fiction.
It really does, but it is explicitly codified in their current military medical literature.
And they're surprisingly transparent about this ambition. The research papers emanating from PLA-affiliated medical institutions, they don't treat this as abstract theory.
Right.
They treat the human nervous system as a distinct operational warfighting domain that requires its own specialized tactics and, well, technological investments.
But translating that kind of cutting-edge theory into an operational reality requires an immense mobilization of resources and a really rigid timeline.
Which is where the sources actually begin, with this strategic triad of deadlines.
Yeah, the deadlines. To understand the trajectory of this modernization, you have to look at the milestones they've set for themselves. That's 2027, 2035, and 2049.
Let's look at 2027 first.
Okay.
So this is the centennial of the PLA's founding. And historically, this was viewed by a lot of Western analysts as this somewhat nebulous, aspirational modernization waypoint.
Like a time to cut ribbons on new facilities, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But that interpretation fundamentally changed in the aftermath of the 20th Party Congress in 2022. And then we saw these subsequent directives observed through 2024 and 2025.
The tone really shifted.
It did. The 2027 goal crystallized into a hard operational mandate. The directive is that by 2027, the PLA must possess the localized capability to successfully execute a large-scale joint amphibious operation across the Taiwan Strait,
Wow.
while simultaneously fielding the anti-accessory denial or A2AD capabilities required to deter or significantly delay a U.S. intervention.
Which is just a monumental logistical and tactical undertaking. I mean, an amphibious invasion is arguably the most complex military maneuver conceivable.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt.
You are coordinating naval surface action groups, subsurface assets, theater ballistic missiles, air superiority campaigns, and electronic warfare. And that's all just to land a massive mechanized force on a highly fortified mountainous island.
Right. It's not just about having the ships. It's about having the joint command and control architecture to orchestrate that absolute chaos seamlessly.
And that joint capability is precisely what the 2027 deadline focuses on. As the intelligence assessments point out, mandating this capability by 2027 does not equate to a political decision to actually launch an invasion in that specific year.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah. Rather, it is a directive to the Central Military Commission to present the political leadership with a credible, executable military option by that date. They refer to this as achieving a strategic, decisive victory in regional localized conflicts.
So 2027 is essentially the regional hurdle, the immediate capability check.
Right.
Then the timeline stretches out to 2035, which introduces this concept that anchors almost all of their current R&D. The goal for 2035 is the intelligentized force.
Right, the intelligentized force.
Well,
Which is distinct from what we've been hearing for years. We've spent the last 20 years talking about informatized warfare, right?
yeah, informatized warfare is essentially the networking of sensors and shooters, the whole C4ISR revolution.
But intelligentized warfare, or I think the term is Zhenenghua,
Yes, Tunengqua.
it seems to push past that human-in-the-loop networking.
Because informatization was really about ensuring that human commanders had maximum situational awareness through data networks. But intelligentization aims to basically remove the human bottleneck entirely from the ODA loop.
The observe, orient, decide, act loop.
Exactly. The doctrine anticipates the complete integration of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and quantum computing into the tactical and strategic decision-making processes.
It's the pursuit of algorithmic advantage. Because if a theater commander is trying to process targeting data from, say, 300 different satellite, drone, and radar feeds all at once, a human brain is just going to hit a saturation point.
It's physically impossible to parse.
Right. But an AI-enabled command and control system can theoretically parse that data, identify the optimal target prioritization, and auto-generate firing solutions across a multi-domain force in literal milliseconds.
And the doctrine basically asserts that whoever's algorithms can compress that decision-making cycle the fastest will dictate the entire tempo of the war.
And by dictating the tempo, you achieve what they call system destruction warfare.
Yes, that is a critical concept in PLA literature. They do not view an adversary as a collection of individual units, tanks, ships, planes.
How do they view them?
They view the adversary as a system of interconnected networks. So the goal of intelligentized warfare isn't necessarily a battle of attrition. It's to use algorithmic speed to sever the data links, blind the sensors, and completely collapse the enemy's operational system before they can even orient themselves to the threat.
Wow. Which really sets the stage for the final deadline, 2049.
The centennial of the People's Republic of China.
Exactly. And the stated goal here is the realization of a world-class military. Now, the sources note that world-class isn't really assigned a rigid public metric in the literature.
Right, it's a bit vague on paper.
But reading between the lines of their procurement,
Mm.
especially their expeditionary logistics, and this massive blue water naval expansion analysts assesses this, or it means achieving parity with or localized superiority over the United States military.
It implies the capacity for sustained global power projection.
The ability to deploy and sustain combat operations anywhere on Earth, protecting their global economic interests.
But achieving that triad of goals, a localized amphibious capability by 2027, an AI-driven force by 2035, and global hegemony by 2049, that requires capital allocation on a scale that is rarely seen in peacetime.
Yeah, so let's examine the financial architecture that's actually funding all of this. The official defense budget announced in March 2026 was $276.7 billion.
Which, on its face, is a massive figure.
It is. But it still falls far short of the U.S. defense budget. However, the analyses we are reviewing demonstrate how incredibly deceptive that top-line number is.
Oh, completely deceptive.
It is essentially what Beijing chooses to publicly categorize under the banner of national defense, omitting massive sectors of their actual military expenditure.
Because the structural differences in how the two nations categorize spending are profound. For instance, the U.S. defense budget includes almost all military research and development.
Right.
In China, dual-use technological R&D, particularly in fields like quantum computing or aerospace, is often funded through state-owned enterprises or civilian science ministries.
So it keeps it off the official defense ledger.
Exactly. Furthermore, major platform procurements can be obfuscated through regional budgets, or this whole military-civil fusion apparatus they have.
And the most glaring omission cited in the sources is the People's Armed Police, the PAP.
Yes, the PP.
We tend to hear police and think of, like, municipal law enforcement giving out speeding tickets.
Right, but that is not the PAP.
No. The PAP is a massive paramilitary organization responsible for internal security, border defense, and maritime rights protection. They operate heavily armed units, and in wartime, they fall directly under the command of the Central Military Commission.
And their budget is staggering.
The central-level budget alone for the PAP in 2024 was roughly $21.5 billion. And that doesn't even include the rapidly expanding space program, which, under the PLA structure, is inherently a military program.
Right, but the most crucial metric for understanding their true capability, and this is super important for you to grasp, is purchasing power parity, or PPP.
Yeah, PPP is fascinating here.
Because comparing raw dollar conversions across vastly different economic models creates a really distorted picture of actual procurement power.
Right. We can't evaluate this like a simple currency exchange at the airport. It's like how a dollar buys a lot more groceries in a rural town than it does in Manhattan.
That's a perfect analogy.
If you look at the input costs, take something fundamental like titanium, or the salaries of state-employed aerospace engineers in Chengdu versus unionized defense contractors in Virginia.
The differences are massive.
The U.S. might allocate $1 billion to develop a new missile system, but a significant percentage of that billion goes toward premium material costs, high civilian labor rates, and the profit margins required by private defense corporations.
Whereas the PLA operates within a state-directed economic model. So their baseline costs for raw materials, manufacturing, labor, and personal compensation are structurally suppressed compared to Western economies.
So a dollar equivalent spent in China yields substantially more physical hardware.
Substantially more. More hardware and more engineering hours. When analysts apply sector-specific PPP rates to the estimated total Chinese military expenditure, the 2024 assessment puts their effective spending power closer to $471 billion.
$471 billion in actual purchasing power. I mean, that fundamentally alters the regional balance of power. At that scale, they aren't just outspending their neighbors. They're outspending the next 22 Indo-Pacific economies combined.
It's absolute financial dominance in their hemisphere.
Yeah. And what is remarkable from a macroeconomic perspective is their restraint.
That's the crazy part.
Despite generating $471 billion in effective capability, China has rigorously maintained its defense spending at roughly 2% of its gross domestic product.
They have held that ratio remarkably stable for over 2 decades now.
It's a very calculated avoidance of the Soviet trap. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union entered this spiraling arms race, eventually dedicating an estimated 15 to 20% of its total economic output to the military-industrial complex.
Which completely hollowed out their civilian economy and led to systemic collapse.
Exactly. And the architects of China's modernization study that failure intimately. Because their overall GDP grew so exponentially over the last 30 years, keeping defense spending pegged at 2% allowed them to fund a historic military expansion without cannibalizing their domestic economic growth.
Or starving other state sectors, it provides them with serious long-term strategic endurance.
Right.
However, and this is a big however, generating the capital and acquiring the hardware is really only half the equation.
Yeah, you actually have to use it.
Exactly.
Right.
Integrating those assets into a cohesive lethal force requires a modern command and control structure. And the sources detail how, historically, the PLA's internal bureaucracy was profoundly ill-equipped for modern multi-domain warfare.
The institutional baggage of the PLA is a major theme in these assessments. You have this organization that began as a revolutionary peasant-based guerrilla movement.
Right.
It evolved into a massive, sprawling land army optimized for territorial defense and protracted ground wars. The organizational chart reflected a Soviet-style military region system.
Where regional commanders operated almost like independent warlords.
Yeah, with massive infantry formations, but basically zero capacity for integrating complex naval, air, or cyber operations.
And the internal self-assessments from PLA generals prior to the Xi Jinping reforms were startlingly blunt about this.
They were.
They repeatedly highlighted a systemic crisis known as the five incapables. And I want to stress, this wasn't a Western critique. This was their own internal diagnosis of their own officer corps.
Let's dissect the five incapables because it illuminates exactly the operational paralysis they are trying to engineer their way out of right now.
Okay, the first incapable is that commanders were unable to make appropriate situational assessments.
Right, because if you take a general who spent 30 years commanding mechanized infantry and you suddenly drop him into a joint operations center where he has to parse satellite telemetry, cyber intrusion alerts, and submarine acoustic data.
The cognitive overload is total.
Total overload.
The data streams of a modern battle space were fundamentally incompatible with their legacy training.
Which leads to the second incapable, which naturally followed. An inability to correctly understand directives from superior authorities.
Yeah, if the higher echelons are attempting to coordinate a complex, multi-domain operation, but the theater commanders lack the technical vocabulary to even grasp the strategic intent, the execution fails immediately.
Which leads to the third incapable, the inability to make timely and clear decisions about operational leadership. They suffered from profound analysis paralysis.
And in an environment where, a hypersonic glide vehicle can cross a theater in minutes, waiting for clarity or political consensus means the asset you are trying to protect is already destroyed.
Exactly. Now, the fourth incapable addressed force integration. They were unable to assemble and deploy troops fit for purpose.
They really struggled with combined arms. They might deploy an air defense battalion, but without coordinating the necessary electronic warfare support or a secure logistics tail.
Which renders the asset totally vulnerable or ineffective.
Right. And then the fifth incapable was this crippling rigidity, an inability to deal with unexpected situations.
The legacy system essentially incentivized adherence to scripted operational plans.
Yeah, no deviation allowed.
So if an adversary introduced an asymmetric variable, the commanders lacked the institutional flexibility or the delegated authority to pivot.
So, to rectify this deeply entrenched operational paralysis, Xi Jinping initiated the most sweeping structural reforms in the PLA's history, starting around 2015.
They basically dismantled the old military regions.
Completely. And established theater commands optimized for joint operations, and they significantly downsized the traditional infantry.
And the crown jewel of that 2015 reform was the creation of the Strategic Support Force, the SSF.
Right, the SSF.
And the strategic logic seemed really sound at the time. They wanted to consolidate all the disparate, high-tech, non-kinetic domain space, cyber, electronic warfare, and psychological operations under one unified roof.
The SSF was designed to be the absolute technological vanguard of the modernization.
However, the documents from early 2024 reveal a massive structural plot twist.
Yeah, this was huge.
In April 2024, less than a decade after its highly publicized inception, the Central Military Commission abruptly dissolved the Strategic Support Force.
Just completely dismantled it.
Which begs the question for anyone paying attention. Why dismantle the very institution built to manage your most critical modern domains? Was it a failure of design or something darker, like corruption?
Well, the assessments point to a confluence of structural flaws and, frankly, political paranoia.
How so?
The SSF, which was intended to break down the silos between different tech domains, had simply evolved into this unmanageable, monolithic silo of its own. Space operations have fundamentally different acquisition cycles, training pipelines, and operational tempos than, say, cyber espionage.
Right, grouping them together just created a massive administrative bottleneck.
Exactly. And furthermore, consolidating that much strategic capability under a single command structure created an unacceptable concentration of power.
Exacerbating the CCP's perpetual fears of internal political threats.
Exactly. So the dissolution of the SSF wasn't an abandonment of those domains. It was a structural refinement reflecting a more mature understanding of informationized warfare. They replaced the SSF with a new architecture defined as the four services and four arms.
They elevated these critical domains into independent entities, reporting directly to the Central Military Commission. And the creation of these independent arms is where we really see the doctrine of system destruction warfare taking physical shape.
Let's look at the Aerospace Force, the ASF.
Yeah.
By separating space operations from the cyber domain, they acknowledge that the orbital environment is no longer merely a supporting layer for terrestrial forces. It is the primary high ground.
Right. The ASF manages the satellite constellations required for ISR intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. But critically, they also manage the counterspace portfolio.
Which includes direct descent, anti-satellite missiles, co-orbital kinetic kill vehicles, and directed energy weapons.
Stuff that sounds like Star Wars.
Truly. The ASF's mandate is to ensure the PLA's access to the space domain while simultaneously possessing the capability to blind or destroy an adversary's orbital architecture.
Effectively severing their over-the-horizon targeting and secure communications.
Exactly.
And then alongside the ASF, we have the Cyberspace Force, the CSF. This arm consolidated their offensive and defensive cyber capabilities, electronic warfare, and spectrum management.
Their operational objective is to achieve localized electromagnetic supremacy.
Right, so if the ASF destroys the satellite, the CSF jams the localized data links and injects malicious code into the adversary's logistics networks.
It's a 1-2 punch. But the most analytically significant development from the 2024 restructuring is the creation of the Information Support Force, the ISF.
Yeah, the ISF. And while it sounds like, I don't know, an administrative IT department.
Right, like the guys who reset your password.
Yeah, exactly. But the ISF is actually the central nervous system of the modern PLA. The ISF is responsible for building and maintaining the network information system that makes joint operations possible.
Because in Western military theory, we talk a lot about the kill chain. Finding a target, fixing it, tracking it, targeting it, engaging it, and assessing the damage.
But modern doctrine is shifting toward a kill web. Instead of a linear chain, you have a decentralized network of sensors and shooters.
And the ISF's job is to ensure that a targeting coordinate generated by an ASF satellite can seamlessly bypass traditional command hierarchies and be instantly transmitted to an Air Force bomber, a Navy destroyer, or a Rocket Force missile battery.
Whichever is best positioned to strike in that exact moment.
Right. The ISF is the architectural glue required to realize the intelligentized warfare we discussed earlier. Without the secure, high-bandwidth data pathways managed by the ISF, the AI algorithms have no data to process and the entire system collapses.
And the CCP provided a highly publicized visual confirmation of this new structural philosophy. The intelligence sources placed heavy emphasis on analyzing the September 30, 2025 military parade in Tiananmen Square.
The 17th military parade since the PRC's founding.
Now, military parades are inherently performative, sure, but the staging is always deeply symbolic of their strategic priorities. In 2025, for the first time, the Aerospace Force, the Cyberspace Force, and the Information Support Force did not march as separate, isolated contingents.
No, they were structurally integrated into a single, combined information operations group.
Which is fascinating.
It wasn't merely a logistical choice for the parade organizers. It was a deliberate, visual manifestation of their joint doctrine. It signaled to domestic and international audiences that information dominance is no longer a supporting effort.
It is the spearhead of the PLA's operational capability.
The ASF, CSF, and ISF functioning as a unified interlocking mechanism to dismantle an adversary's systems.
But this leads us to perhaps the most unsettling section of the source material. We've defined the structural apparatus, but what exactly constitutes information in this new paradigm?
Right, what are they actually targeting?
Exactly. And the doctrine reveals a profound evolution. They're no longer solely focused on infiltrating silicon networks or jamming radio frequencies. The ultimate target of this new operational group is the biological network, the human brain.
This is the operationalization of Khan, the concept of cognitive dominance or mental hegemony.
Okay.
Now, Western militaries certainly employ psychological operations, information operations designed to influence foreign audiences or degrade enemy morale.
Popping leaflets, broadcasting messages, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But the PLA doctrine treats the cognitive domain not as an abstract psychological state, but as a tangible, physical battle space. General Hifuchu, a really prominent figure in the PLA's Academy of Military Medical Sciences, has explicitly written that the neurobiological architecture of the commander will become the primary target of future conflicts.
We were talking about the intersection of neuroscience, algorithmic AI, and combat operations. The sources detail extensive, long-term research funded by the PLA at institutions like the National University of Defense Technology, the NUDT.
And they're aggressively pursuing direct brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs.
Yeah, they have been developing proprietary chips, like the Brain Talker series. And these are specifically engineered to decode the complex electrical signals of human brainwaves with extreme efficiency.
Filtering out the massive signal-to-noise ratio that has traditionally plagued non-invasive EEG systems.
Right. And the tactical applications they are prototyping are profound. They are conducting trials using advanced EEG caps where operators control unmanned aerial vehicles or navigate ground robotics entirely through decoded thought patterns.
And the strategic logic here is mitigating the exact cognitive overload we discussed earlier. In a highly contested, multi-domain environment, the physical interface, keyboards, touchscreens, voice commands, that becomes a latency bottleneck.
It's like comparing a dial-up modem to fiber optics. The ultimate vision articulated in these academic papers is a scenario where a theater commander is physically wired into the ISF network. Through a bidirectional BCI, the commander's neural pathways are integrated directly with the data streams from the battlefield sensors.
It's wild.
And furthermore, they are exploring brain networking. This is the concept of linking the neural outputs of multiple operators to create a synchronized algorithmic hive mind.
A hive mind that can process tactical variables faster than any individual human.
It's like a multiplayer video game HUD a heads-up display. But instead of just seeing a map on a screen, a commander's brain is directly linked to battlefield sensors and even the brains of their troops.
It completely challenges our fundamental understanding of individual agency in combat.
It really does.
And while the concept of a neural networked command staff sounds like speculative futurism, we have to evaluate the foundational science they are successfully demonstrating today.
Right, because they are doing this today.
The intelligence reports highlight a highly illustrative and factual experiment conducted at Zhejiang University.
Yes, this is where the literature crosses the Rubicon into deeply unsettling territory. Let's delve into the rat cyborg experiment because it demonstrates the mechanics of what they're actually attempting to do.
Okay, so researchers implanted a microelectrode array directly into the motor cortex of a live rat.
Wow.
They then established a wireless interface between that rat and a human operator. The human manipulator wore a non-invasive EEG interface.
So no implants for the human.
Right, just a cap. And through highly calibrated algorithms translating the human's motor intentions into electrical stimulation in the rat's brain, the human operator was able to remotely guide the live rat through a complex physical maze.
That is insane.
They successfully transmitted directional intent from a huge brain across a wireless network into the motor functions of an animal.
They bypassed the physical environment entirely and established a direct brain-to-brain control link. Now, obviously, navigating a rat through a maze is light years away from coordinating a mechanized battalion via neural link.
Obviously, yeah.
But the foundational physics and neurobiology of the concept have been proven. If you can interface with a biological system to transmit commands, you can theoretically interface with it to disrupt commands.
The brain literally becomes hackable infrastructure.
Which introduces the biotechnology aspect of their modernization. If the human body is a recognized operational domain, then the biological sciences become weaponized disciplines.
Right, and the PLA's Academy of Military Medical Sciences has heavily integrated with civilian genomic research. They are taking a profound interest in synthetic biology and gene editing technologies like CRISPR.
And the scale of their genomic data collection is unprecedented. The sources detail the global operations of BGI, a massive Chinese genomics conglomerate with deep ties to the state.
They have amassed one of the largest genomic databases on the planet.
And the research taking place within China utilizing advanced gene editing is highly controversial. The sources highlighted studies where researchers successfully spliced the human MCPH1 gene into macaque monkey embryos.
And that's a gene critical to human brain size and cognitive development. Right.
Yes, exactly. And these transgenic monkeys exhibited altered brain development patterns, suggesting enhanced short-term memory capabilities.
And in parallel to that, researchers have experimented with creating human-monkey chimeras, introducing human stem cells into primate embryos.
Okay, I have to inject some pushback here just for the sake of analysis.
Sure.
The line between aggressive, maybe ethically dubious medical research and an actual military weapons program is significant. Gene therapies and genomic research are happening globally, primarily aimed at curing diseases like Alzheimer's or understanding evolutionary biology.
That's true.
Is the intelligence community conflating civilian medical research with a concerted bioweapons program? Like, how much of this is defensive versus offensive?
That is the pivotal question of intent versus capability. To understand the PLA's intent, the intelligence community looks directly at their published doctrine.
Right.
If we refer back to the 2017 edition of The Science of Military Strategy, which, remember, is the authoritative textbook used to educate their flag officers at the National Defense University, it explicitly identifies biology as a new domain of military struggle.
It's in the textbook.
It's in the textbook. Furthermore, researchers from the NEDT have published extensive papers on biological deterrence, specifically articulating the terrifying concept of specific ethnic genetic attacks.
Let's define exactly what that implies because it's heavy. An ethnic genetic attack theorizes the creation of a tailored biological pathogen engineered to target specific genetic markers unique to a particular ethnic population.
It's the ultimate precision weapon.
A virus that could sweep through a diverse population but only incapacitate or kill individuals carrying a specific genetic sequence.
And the PLA researchers argue in these papers that the advent of CRISPR and advanced synthetic biology makes these weapons highly lethal, incredibly difficult to attribute, and relatively inexpensive compared to traditional nucleo or conventional arms.
Now, to maintain strict analytical neutrality based on the sources provided to us,
Right.
there's no definitive intelligence in these documents confirming that the PLA has actively manufactured an ethnic genetic weapon.
Right, no proof of manufacturing.
However, the literature definitively proves that the PLA considers biological deterrence a reality. They view genetic warfare as a valid, theoretically sound operational domain, and they are aggressively funding the dual-use biotechnology infrastructure required to realize those theories.
Exactly. So we have mapped out a trajectory that moves from neural networking to theoretical genetic pathogens. But cognitive and biological dominance cannot exist in a vacuum.
No, you cannot enforce a blockade of Taiwan or secure the Strait of Malacca with a brain-computer interface.
Hegemony requires physical mass. It requires heavy metal.
So we must transition from the biological frontier back to the massive industrial-scale physical expansion of the PLA's conventional and nuclear forces, because the sheer scale of the hardware they are fielding is reshaping the global security architecture.
Let's start with naval dominance. The People's Liberation Army Navy, the plan, has already surpassed the U.S. Navy in total hull numbers, making it the largest naval force globally.
But the narrative that this is merely a quantity over quality coastal defense force is entirely outdated, right?
Completely outdated. They are rapidly closing the qualitative technological gap across all major surface and subsurface platforms.
And the most prominent symbol of this qualitative leap is the Fujian, also known as the CV-18. This is their third aircraft carrier, commissioned in late 2025.
Right. Now, their first two carriers were essentially derivatives of older Soviet designs. They utilized that distinct ski jump ramp on the bow, which severely limits the payload and fuel capacity of the aircraft taking off.
But the Fujian is an entirely different class of vessel.
It's an 80,000-ton supercarrier.
And the critical technological advancement here is the integration of EMALS.
The electromagnetic aircraft launch system.
Yeah. Traditional supercarriers, including the older U.S. Nimitz class, utilize complex steam-powered catapults to launch aircraft. Steam systems are maintenance-heavy, they require massive amounts of fresh water, and the sudden application of force puts immense structural stress on the airframes.
Right, but EMALS utilizes linear induction motors to generate a highly calibrated, electromagnetically controlled acceleration.
And the strategic implications of EMALS are massive. It's not just about a smoother ride for the pilot. EMALS allows you to launch heavier aircraft, fully loaded with munitions and fuel, significantly extending the strike range of the carrier air wing.
And critically, it allows the Fujian to launch heavier support aircraft like airborne early warning and control OASIS planes.
Having an AWACS in the air extends the fleet's radar horizon by hundreds of miles. It fundamentally changes how a carrier strike group engages in over-the-horizon naval combat. And they are pairing this system with their new J-35 fifth-generation stealth fighters.
So they are fielding a genuinely modern fifth-generation carrier strike group, and they are shielding these capital ships with an incredibly robust surface combatant fleet.
Yeah, the destroyers.
They have mass-produced over 30 of the Type 052D destroyers. These are highly capable multi-role vessels equipped with advanced phased array radar systems and vertical launch systems capable of deploying long-range anti-ship cruise missiles and sophisticated air defense interceptors.
However, beneath the surface, the narrative is slightly more complex.
Very true.
The sources highlight that China's nuclear submarine production rate has quietly surpassed the United States, launching advanced Jin-class ballistic missile submarines. But we also see evidence of the friction inherent in scaling up high-end manufacturing.
Yeah, the intelligence assessments detailed a really significant incident in 2024.
The pure side sinking of the newly constructed Zhu-class attack submarine.
Right. It just foundered and sank while moored at the shipyard during its initial outfitting or trials.
Which is a catastrophic engineering failure. I mean, submarine construction is arguably the most unforgiving engineering discipline on Earth.
There's zero margin for error.
You need flawless integration of high-pressure plumbing, acoustic quieting technologies, and complex nuclear reactor shielding. You can weld the hull together quickly to meet a political quota, but if the internal quality control fails, the asset is useless.
The sinking of the Zhu class is a stark reminder that hyper-accelerated timelines often clash violently with the unforgiving realities of complex systems engineering.
It's a profound embarrassment and a significant financial loss. However, from a strategic analysis standpoint, a single shipyard failure has not disrupted their broader macroeconomic trajectory, particularly regarding their strategic deterrent.
No, when we pivot to the expansion of their nuclear triad, the scale of the buildup is historically unprecedented.
For decades, China operated under a doctrine of minimal deterrence. If we look back to 2020, intelligence estimates place their stockpile at roughly 300 nuclear warheads.
The logic was simple. They didn't need parity with the US or Russia. They just needed a sufficient number of survivable mobile warheads to guarantee a devastating retaliatory strike against anyone foolish enough to launch a first strike against Beijing.
But the current documents show a total abandonment of that minimal deterrence posture.
The expansion is staggering. Today, estimates place their operational stockpile well over 600 warheads. They have doubled their nuclear inventory in less than half a decade. Furthermore, the projections outlined in the assessments indicate they are on pace to field 1,000 operational warheads by 2030 and up to 1,500 by the 2035 deadline.
They are actively seeking absolute numerical parity with the deployed arsenals of the United States and the Russian Federation.
But it isn't just the sheer volume of fissile material, it is the delivery architecture that fundamentally alters the global security calculus.
Right. The reports highlight the discovery of massive, newly constructed intercontinental ballistic missile ICBM silo fields in the western deserts, specifically in Hami, Yumen, and Ordos.
We are talking about hundreds of hardened concrete silos designed for their new solid propellant ICBMs.
Now, this prompts a critical strategic question. For decades, China relied heavily on road mobile launchers and submarines because a mobile missile is incredibly difficult to target. Why invest hundreds of billions in fixed stationary silos whose exact GPS coordinates are known to every U.S. reconnaissance satellite?
Well, the construction of fixed silos indicates a fundamental shift in their nuclear operational doctrine. Mobile systems ensure survivability for a retaliatory second strike, but fixed, solid propellant silos wired into advanced early warning satellite networks strongly suggest a transition toward a launch-on-warning posture.
I want to push back on that interpretation slightly, just thinking through the logic.
Go ahead.
The U.S. operates hundreds of fixed Minuteman III silos, but we don't strictly bind ourselves to a launch-on-warning doctrine. Couldn't the construction of 300 silos in the Gobi Desert essentially be a massive shell game?
Oh, it's sponge strategy, yeah.
Exactly. If they only put missiles in 50 of them and leave 250 empty, they force the U.S. to expend 300 of its own warheads to ensure the fields are destroyed, thereby soaking up the U.S. arsenal.
The shell game or sponge theory is actively debated in the intelligence community. However, the concurrent expansion of their space-based early warning architecture, which is designed specifically to detect the thermal bloom of a U.S. missile launch, aligns more closely with the requirements for launch on warning.
Ah, I see.
Under the old doctrine, China would absorb the initial nuclear blow and then retaliate with surviving mobile units. Under a launch on warning posture, the moment those satellites detect incoming warheads, the PLA intends to launch their silo-based ICBMs before the incoming strike even detonates.
Which radically compresses the decision-making window in a crisis. We are moving from a scenario where leaders have hours or days to negotiate to a scenario where a launch detection triggers an automated, irreversible response in a matter of minutes.
And the complexity of that crisis management is compounded by new delivery systems like the DF-27.
Yes, the DF-27.
Deployed operationally around 2024, it introduces a profound element of tactical ambiguity. It is an intermediate-range ballistic missile utilizing a hypersonic glide vehicle payload.
And the estimated range is between 5,000 and 8,000 kilometers. This places crucial U.S. strategic nodes in the Indo-Pacific, specifically Guam and Hawaii, directly within its targeting envelope from launchers deep within the Chinese mainland.
But the real danger of the DF-27 isn't just its speed or maneuverability, it's the fact that it is a dual-capable system.
Right. It can be armed with a conventional high-explosive warhead designed to crater a runway, or it can be armed with a thermonuclear warhead.
So if a U.S. early warning radar detects a DF-27 flying toward Honolulu, the missile defense commanders have absolutely no way of knowing whether the incoming weapon is intended to destroy an airfield or vaporize the entire city until the moment of detonation.
That ambiguity is highly destabilizing. It forces the defending nation to assume the worst-case scenario, potentially triggering a massive, disproportionate response to a conventional strike.
The DF-27 is designed to paralyze U.S. decision-making and hold critical logistics hubs at risk. And securing logistics is paramount, not just for the U.S., but for China's expanding global ambitions.
Which brings us to global presence. The PLA is fundamentally transitioning from a regional defense force to an expeditionary global power. You see this operationalized in their joint military exercises.
Looking at the data compiled by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the ISI's trajectory is really clear.
In 2015, the PLA engaged in 19 joint exercises with foreign militaries. By 2024, that metric almost doubled to 34.
And the nature of those engagements has evolved. Historically, the ground forces, the Army, handled the diplomatic socializing. But recently, the plan has superseded the Army in exercise frequency.
It is the classic behavior of a rising blue water navy showing the flag and building interoperability with strategic partners.
We saw the Air Force deploy to Egypt in 2025 for the Eagles of Civilization exercise. They are conducting highly sophisticated anti-submarine warfare drills with the Russian Navy in the contested waters of the Indo-Pacific.
And they are running the Sea Guardian series with Pakistan.
Yeah.
They are actively studying foreign doctrines and demonstrating their ability to sustain forces far beyond the first island chain.
But global power projection requires global infrastructure. A fleet cannot operate across the Indian Ocean without logistics nodes, fuel, ammunition, dry docks.
So we are seeing a concerted effort to establish overseas basing. The documents detail the expansion of the Ream Naval Base in Cambodia, which provides the plan with a persistent operational footprint in the Gulf of Thailand.
They have established a paramilitary outpost in Tajikistan to monitor the volatile Afghan border.
And intelligence assessments indicate aggressive diplomatic maneuvering to secure basing rights in Western Africa and the Middle East.
And that push toward the Middle East and the Indian Ocean is driven by the defining geostrategic vulnerability of the Chinese state. The Malacca dilemma.
The Malacca dilemma. This is the geographic reality that haunts Beijing's strategic planners. Despite their massive domestic coal reserves, China is highly dependent on imported hydrocarbons to fuel its economy and its military.
Roughly 80% of their crude oil imports originate in the Middle East and Africa.
And those tankers must transit through the Strait of Malacca, a narrow, highly congested maritime choke point between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia.
So in the event of a protracted conflict over Taiwan, the U.S. Navy and its regional allies possess the capability to institute a distant blockade, effectively sealing the Strait of Malacca.
It would sever China's energy lifeline without requiring U.S. ships to even enter the heavily defended waters near the Chinese coast.
Exactly. The PLA's frantic development of a blue water navy, the construction of aircraft carriers, and the pursuit of overseas bases in the Indian Ocean are fundamentally aimed at acquiring the capability to protect those sea lines of communication and break the potential stranglehold of a distant blockade.
So we have mapped out an institution that, on paper, appears to be an unstoppable juggernaut. They have a $471 billion effective budget. They're integrating AI into their command node. They're theorizing cognitive warfare. They are mass-producing supercarriers and nuclear silos, and they are expanding their geopolitical footprint globally to secure their logistics.
It's an imposing picture.
If you stop reading the intelligence assessments there, the conclusion is bleak. But the sources do not stop there. The deeper you read into the internal analyses, the more you uncover profound systemic vulnerabilities.
Yes, let's analyze the Achilles heel of the PLA. Because these internal frictions threaten to collapse this entire modernization effort from the inside out.
What's the biggest one?
The most glaring, unquantifiable vulnerability is what Chinese military theorists themselves diagnose as the peace disease.
The peace disease.
The PLA possesses a massive arsenal of untested, cutting-edge technology, but the institution itself has not experienced major combat operations since a brief, highly costly border war with Vietnam in 1979.
Think about the sociological and institutional implications of that. There is virtually no one in the active duty ranks of the PLA today who has ever commanded troops under fire.
Exactly. There is zero institutional memory of the chaos, the friction, and the sheer psychological terror of high-intensity combat.
They can run heavily scripted, massive live-fire exercises in the Gobi Desert or the South China Sea all day long. But an exercise fundamentally lacks the lethal unpredictability of a peer adversary actively trying to destroy your networks and kill your personnel.
And history is replete with examples of militaries fielding technologically superior equipment that completely disintegrated when subjected to the shock of actual combat. The transition from peacetime administration to wartime execution requires a brutal adaptability that the PLA has simply not been forced to demonstrate.
The peace disease is a pervasive, unknown variable that haunts the Central Military Commission. And that lack of combat experience is compounded by the systemic corruption that infects the leadership structure.
Oh, the corruption is deep.
We've watched Xi Jinping orchestrate massive rolling purges across the senior ranks of the military. Entire echelons of leadership have simply vanished from public view.
The intelligence reports meticulously detail the decapitation of the rocket force leadership.
Which is wild, because those are the very commanders entrusted with managing the rapid expansion of the nuclear silo fields we just discussed.
Exactly. We have seen multiple ministers of national defense summarily removed. Xi Jinping has utilized massive political work conferences, notably the Goshen Conference in 2014 and the Yan'an Conference in 2024, to demand absolute ideological loyalty and attempt to eradicate the entrenched patronage networks.
The 2024 Yan'an Conference provides an almost absurd case study in the depth of the rot. The prominent casualty of that purge was General Miao Hua.
Right.
He was the director of the political work department. He was the chief political commissar. His explicit job description was to enforce the ideological purity of the officer corps and root out corruption.
And yet, the chief inquisitor himself was purged for severe disciplinary violations.
When the man tasked with policing the system is fundamentally corrupt, it indicates that the corruption isn't an anomaly. It is the operating system itself.
And the operational consequence of this corruption is what internal PLA critiques refer to as fake combat capabilities.
Fake combat capabilities.
The intelligence notes a pervasive history of officers securing promotions through bribery and patronage rather than tactical competence. If a theater commander bought his rank, or if logistics officers have been skimming procurement funds, the paper strength of the unit is an illusion.
The CCP leadership is acutely aware that they might order an operation, only to find that the units lack the resolve, the competence, or the actual material readiness to execute the mission.
Which introduces a fascinating, deeply ingrained philosophical contradiction at the core of their military doctrine. It is the classic red versus expert dilemma.
Yes, the red versus expert dilemma. This tension is inherent to any armed force built and managed by an authoritarian political party. To execute the highly complex, intelligentized warfare envisioned by 2035, the PLA requires experts.
Right. They need officers capable of exercising mission command.
The ability to understand a broad strategic objective, act independently, and make split-second localized decisions in a chaotic, decentralized environment without waiting for permission from higher headquarters.
Because if your doctrine relies on algorithmic advantage and compressing the OODA loop to milliseconds, you cannot afford a command structure where a battalion commander has to send a request up the chain of command to Beijing just to authorize the launch of a drone swarm.
Right. But that operational requirement for decentralized initiative directly conflicts with the political requirement to be read.
Exactly.
The Communist Party views the military not as a national defense force, but as the armed wing of the party itself. The paramount priority is absolute, centralized control, currently codified under the CMC Chairman Responsibility System, which centralizes all strategic authority directly in the hands of Xi Jinping.
And the manifestation of that control on the ground is the political commissar system. Every commanding officer in the PLA, down to the company level, has a political officer embedded alongside them.
They share command authority.
Yep.
So you are demanding that an officer be a bold, independent, fast-thinking innovator on the battlefield. But simultaneously, they cannot issue an operational order without the countersignature of a political officer whose primary concern is ideological adherence.
And if the operation fails or if the officer acts too independently, they face the very real threat of being purged for disloyalty.
The psychological result is a profound risk aversion. Officers delegate decision-making authority upwards to avoid taking responsibility.
This rigid, top-down authoritarian control mechanism is fundamentally incompatible with the fluid, decentralized, high-velocity nature of modern multi-domain warfare.
And as if the organizational paralysis wasn't a severe enough headwind, there is a macro-level existential crisis bearing down on the Chinese state that no amount of AI or defense spending can easily solve.
The demographic collapse.
The demographic time bomb.
The legacy of the one-child policy, combined with rapid urbanization, has resulted in an aging population and a rapidly contracting birth rate.
The intelligence projections cited in the documents estimate that by 2050, only 59% of the Chinese population will be of working age, tasked with supporting an incredibly massive elderly demographic.
This places immense structural strain on the state. As the dependency ratio skyrockets, the civilian economy will demand massive influxes of capital for healthcare, pensions, and social stability.
At a certain point, the Politburo will have to make agonizing choices between funding the welfare of hundreds of millions of elderly citizens or funding the construction of the next supercarrier or nuclear silo field.
But the more immediate tactical problem is recruitment.
Who is going to physically staff a modern 2 million person military when the pool of prime military-age youth is shrinking every year, and the civilian tech sector is aggressively competing for those exact same capable engineers and operators?
It is a severe manpower constraint.
But let me posit a counter-argument based on the capabilities we discussed earlier.
Okay, what is it?
If they are facing a severe shortage of capable human operators, couldn't they view the intelligentized force not just as a tactical upgrade, but as the ultimate solution to the demographic cliff?
Oh, I see where you're going.
If you don't have enough fighter pilots or tank drivers, you aggressively lean into the AI algorithms, the BCI interfaces, and you build 1 million autonomous drone swarms. You replace the vanishing human soldier with autonomous platforms.
That is certainly a vector of their research. But relying heavily on autonomous weapons platforms amplifies the exact political vulnerability we just identified.
The trust issue.
Yes, it returns to the issue of trust and control. If the authoritarian apparatus of the CCP does not trust its own human commanders to act independently without a political commissar looking over their shoulder, does the leadership truly trust a machine learning algorithm to operate with autonomy?
That's a great point.
Are they willing to grant an AI the delegated authority to launch a kinetic strike or manage a nuclear early warning system, knowing that an algorithmic hallucination or an unpredicted variable could inadvertently trigger a global conflict? The absolute desire for political control clashes violently with the autonomy required to replace human mass with machine intelligence.
It is a profoundly tangled web of ambition, technological leaps, and historical baggage. So let's recap the journey we've taken through this massive stack of intelligence.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We did. We began by charting the PLA's rigid timeline, the mandate to possess an amphibious invasion capability by 2027. The drive to fully integrate quantum computing and AI into an intelligentized force by 2035, and the overarching ambition to achieve global military hegemony by 2049.
And we examined the massive financial engine powering this, realizing that when adjusted for purchasing power, their $471 billion defense budget establishes absolute regional dominance.
We analyzed their attempt to cure their historical operational paralysis, dismantling the strategic support force, and reorganizing around a new information operations group to build a decentralized kill web.
We ventured into the chilling frontier of cognitive dominance, exploring how brain-computer interfaces, neural networking, and synthetic biology are shifting the battle space from physical geography to the human nervous system.
We tracked the massive expansion of their physical mass. the integration of EMLs on supercarriers, the shift from minimal nuclear deterrence to a massive silo-based launch-on-warning posture, and their push for global basing to escape the geographic trap of the Malacca dilemma.
And finally, we pulled back the curtain to examine a massive military apparatus plagued by the inexperience of the peace disease, paralyzed by systemic corruption and political purges, and facing an inescapable demographic decline.
It is a comprehensive portrait of an institution attempting to force its way into the future while being aggressively restrained by the political architecture of its past. And that inherent contradiction leads me to a final provocative thought based on everything we've synthesized today.
Let's hear it.
The PLA is sprinting to construct a futuristic, intelligentized military. Their doctrine explicitly demands highly autonomous AI systems, rapid decentralized decision-making, and algorithmic independence on the battlefield to overwhelm Western OODA loops. Yet the architects of this futuristic military operate within a rigid, authoritarian political system that demands absolute top-down control, inflexible obedience, and ideological purity above all else.
Those two paradigms, algorithmic autonomy and authoritarian control, are on an unavoidable collision course.
Exactly. When the 2035 deadline arrives, can an artificial intelligence actually be trained to be a loyal Communist Party member? Or will the PLA's ultimate technological breakthrough, the very AI networks they believe will guarantee them global dominance, prove to be exactly what breaks the party's control?
That tension will ultimately dictate the success or failure of their entire modernization project.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The geopolitical landscape is shifting rapidly, and understanding the doctrine behind the headlines is crucial. Keep asking the hard questions, keep interrogating the narratives, and continue exploring these strategic assessments on your own. Because as the intelligence demonstrates, the next major global conflict may not be decided by who controls the most ocean, but by who controls the cognitive architecture of the commanders fighting it.